There was a serious concern that if strong action had not been taken at the right time, the situation could have escalated very quickly. Intelligence suggested that without intervention, the development of a nuclear weapon might have been only weeks away. That possibility alone raised alarm at the highest levels. The goal was clear and firm: no nuclear weapons, no progress toward them, and no hidden attempts to get close. The focus wasn't just on stopping a threat, but on preventing it from ever reaching a dangerous stage. At the same time, there was a broader hope tied to all of this. Beyond military strategy and defense plans, the bigger aim was stability. Leaders wanted to see a region that could move toward peace instead of conflict. The Middle East has seen its share of tension over the years, and the intention here was to avoid another major crisis that could affect millions of lives. However, the situation on the ground remained uncertain. Questions about control, influence, and the next steps were still being discussed. Plans were forming rapidly, and decisions were expected soon. Everything was moving forward, but carefully. In Qatar, activity had reached an intense level at Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American airbase in the Middle East. The base had shifted into full operational readiness. Troops from the 82nd Airborne Division had begun arriving in waves, transported by air. These soldiers, trained for rapid response, quickly moved into position around the outer areas of the base. They weren't actively engaging yet, they were waiting. Every unit was on standby, ready to move at a moment's notice if orders came through. One possible objective being discussed was Kharg Island, a key location tied to oil exports in the Persian Gulf. If action was required, these troops would be among the first to respond. Away from the main runways, temporary landing strips had been set up in the desert. These areas were busy around the clock. Fuel trucks were lined up and ready, positioned along the taxi paths. Helicopters were constantly arriving and departing, creating a steady rhythm of movement. Transport helicopters brought in more soldiers, while patrol helicopters scanned the skies for potential drone activity. The moment a helicopter touched down, ground crews rushed in. Fuel lines were connected within seconds, and refueling began immediately. Efficiency was critical. Within minutes, the aircraft would lift off again, either returning for more personnel or continuing surveillance missions. While all of this was happening overseas, preparations continued back in the United States. At Fort Bragg, another wave of equipment was being organized and loaded. Massive C-17 cargo planes were filled with heavy military vehicles. One by one, M1 Abrams tanks were carefully driven into the aircraft. These machines are incredibly large and heavy, and fitting them inside required precision. Behind the tanks came additional support vehicles, tow trucks, fuel carriers, rocket systems, and armored transport units. Each piece of equipment had a purpose, whether it was defense, mobility, or firepower. Everything was being sent to strengthen the base in Qatar and ensure it could handle any situation. Inside the aircraft, nothing was left unsecured. Thick chains were attached from the floor to each vehicle, tightened and checked multiple times. Even the smallest movement during flight could be dangerous, so every detail mattered. Loadmasters inspected each connection carefully before giving the final signal to close the aircraft. Once ready, the planes took off, heavy with cargo. The engines pushed hard as they lifted into the air and began the long journey east. After many hours in flight, they arrived in Qatar, where unloading began immediately. As the ramps opened, vehicles rolled out one after another. Rocket systems were among the first to move, heading directly to positions where they could defend the base and monitor the coastline. If needed, they could also be used to strike targets across the water. Armored vehicles followed, spreading out across key areas, near entrances, along fences, and around important buildings. Fuel trucks moved toward the desert strips, ready to support aircraft operations. Other equipment was delivered to units stationed outside the main base. Meanwhile, the soldiers who had arrived earlier began setting up their temporary living spaces. Tents were arranged in neat rows across the sandy ground. Each one was secured tightly to handle the desert winds. Inside, sleeping gear was laid out, and personal items were organized carefully. Once the camp was in place, the troops gathered for a briefing. An officer explained the procedures in case of an alert, where to go, what to do, and how quickly each unit needed to respond. Every step was planned in advance to avoid confusion during critical moments. After the briefing, attention turned to equipment and weapons. Crates were opened, and ammunition was checked piece by piece. Machine gun belts were inspected and loaded into mounted weapons. Gunners tested their systems to make sure everything worked smoothly. Rifle units prepared their gear as well, loading magazines and securing them in their vests. Specialized teams checked advanced equipment, including missile systems designed to stop armored threats. The entire camp began to take on a different feel. It was no longer just a place to stay, but a fully prepared operational zone. Aircraft on the base were also being readied. V-22 Ospreys, known for their ability to take off like helicopters and fly like planes, were inspected and prepared for possible missions. Maintenance crews worked through detailed checks, ensuring every part was functioning correctly. If an operation were to begin, these aircraft would carry troops quickly across the water and place them directly at their destination. The plan was already in place. The troops had been briefed. The only thing missing was the final order. Above the base, the airspace remained under constant watch. Helicopters and fighter jets patrolled the skies, keeping an eye out for any incoming threats. Drones, in particular, were a major concern. Surveillance systems tracked everything, and any unidentified object was dealt with immediately before it could come close. Back on the main airfield, activity never slowed down. Fuel crews worked continuously, servicing fighter jets as they returned from missions. Aircraft landed, refueled quickly, and took off again. This cycle repeated day and night without pause. Out at sea, aircraft carriers supported the operation as well. Helicopters moved back and forth between the ships and the base, bringing in more Marines. Each group arrived ready, carrying their gear and moving straight into position upon landing. The buildup showed no signs of stopping. More troops, more equipment, and more supplies continued to arrive. With each passing hour, the operation grew stronger, more organized, and more prepared for whatever might come next.